The dim glow of the bar lights reflected off the polished counter as she moved gracefully from one end to the other, balancing a tray of drinks despite the weight pressing heavily on her body. Her hand rested briefly on her swollen belly, a silent reminder of the life growing inside her, before she forced herself to smile at a group of customers. To anyone watching, she was just another bartender trying to make ends meet, but behind her calm demeanor was a storm of exhaustion, fear, and quiet strength. Each night she stood for hours, serving strangers with politeness, hiding the truth of her identity from anyone who might recognize her. Her body begged for rest, her heart yearned for comfort, yet her determination never wavered. She carried not only the child of a powerful man but also the weight of betrayal and neglect. The millionaire, her husband, lived in luxury, blind to her suffering, unaware of the sacrifices she made in silence. She never told him of the long nights, the humiliation of earning tips while her belly grew larger, or the ache in her back as she pushed herself beyond limits. It wasn't pride that kept her silent, but survival. Abandoned emotionally, she had no choice but to endure. This hidden struggle defined her every day, shaping a woman of resilience whose pain went unseen, whose dignity remained intact even as her heart broke in secret. And soon, the truth of her sacrifices would shake his entire world. The millionaire's world was wrapped in glittering luxury, a life built on endless meetings, lavish galas, and the constant hum of admiration from those who wished to be in his orbit. His penthouse overlooked the city skyline, his cars gleamed in private garages, and his business empire expanded with each passing day. He told himself his wife was comfortable, resting peacefully in the safety of their home, surrounded by everything money could provide. In his mind, he had fulfilled his role as a provider: lavish gifts, expensive clothes, a mansion staffed with attendants. He rarely paused to think beyond that, assuming she wanted for nothing. The truth of her isolation, her pain, never once entered his thoughts. To him, her absence from his public life was a form of protection, a way of shielding her from the harsh lights of society's scrutiny. Yet whispers began to circulate in unexpected corners. At first, he dismissed them. Rumors in the city were as common as rain. But the murmur grew persistent. A woman who looked strikingly like his wife had been seen working behind the counter of a bar, her belly swollen with pregnancy. The words unsettled him, though he laughed them off in conversation. How could his wife, the woman he believed to be living in comfort, lower herself to such indignity? The idea clashed violently with the image he held of her. Still, a seed of doubt was planted, and it would only grow stronger with time, until denial was no longer possible. The night he finally decided to see for himself was one that would burn into his memory forever. The bar was crowded, filled with the usual mix of laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint haze of cigarette smoke. He entered quietly, his tailored suit drawing curious glances, but his mind was focused on only one thing: proving the rumors false. Yet the moment his eyes landed on the figure behind the counter, his entire world cracked open. There she was, his wife, visibly pregnant, her face pale with exhaustion, moving carefully as she handed drinks to impatient customers. The sight struck him like a blow. She should have been resting in comfort, cherished and protected, not forced to smile weakly at strangers while balancing a tray in trembling hands. He saw the way patrons whispered, some sneering, others pitying, their judgmental stares cutting into her dignity. His stomach knotted with rage. Not at her, but at himself. How could he have been so blind, so detached, to let things spiral to this point? The shame burned deeper than any wound. She caught his gaze for a fleeting second, and in her eyes he saw not surprise but a deep, haunting sadness, as if she had long ago stopped expecting him to see her pain. His chest tightened, guilt flooding him, mixed with anger at the cruelty of fate and at his own negligence. He stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move, his entire empire meaningless as the reality of his wife's suffering shattered his pride. Long before that night in the bar, her descent into this hidden reality had begun quietly, almost invisibly. On the surface, she was the wife of a millionaire, wrapped in silk and jewels, but behind the walls of their grand mansion, she lived a life of loneliness. He was absent more often than not, buried in business meetings, parties, and the company of people who fed his ego. At first, she tried to believe his distance was temporary, that he would come back to her with warmth and care. But as her pregnancy advanced, she felt his presence slip further away, leaving her isolated in a house that felt more like a museum than a home. Bills and small expenses that she assumed he handled suddenly fell into her lap, ignored and unpaid. The staff grew cold, some even dismissive, sensing her lack of authority in the absence of her husband. She realized she could not rely on anyone, not even him, for the basic needs of her unborn child. Driven by desperation but also by pride, she refused to beg or complain. Instead, she chose to work, even if it meant stepping into a world that judged her harshly. Behind the bar, she found a small sense of control, though it came at a steep price. The strain on her body was relentless, aching feet, swollen legs, and the constant fear that a single misstep might harm her baby. Yet she endured, because every coin she earned, every hour she stood, meant she was fighting for her child's survival. Her greatest fear wasn't the whispers of strangers, but the thought that her child might be born into a world where she had failed to protect and provide. And so, she carried her burden in silence, her dignity intact, even as exhaustion consumed her. He pushed through the crowd with a force that made heads turn, his presence impossible to ignore. The bar's chatter dimmed as he approached the counter, his sharp suit and blazing eyes a stark contrast to the dim, smoky air. She froze when she saw him standing there, a storm of emotions written across his face, anger at what he was seeing, confusion over how it had come to this, shame that she had been reduced to such circumstances, and heartbreak at realizing he had been blind to it all. For a long, heavy moment, neither spoke, the silence between them louder than the music playing in the background. Finally, his voice broke the air, trembling with a mix of fury and disbelief. "What are you doing here?" His words, though harsh, carried an undertone of desperation. She stared back at him, her eyes tired yet unwavering, and after a deep breath, she answered with a calm that cut deeper than any outburst. "What choice did I have?" The words struck him harder than he expected, stripping away his pride. She continued, her voice breaking as she spoke the truth she had kept locked inside. "You left me alone in that mansion, surrounded by walls but no warmth. You thought money was enough, but I needed you. I needed your care, your presence, not just the luxury you threw at me. When the bills piled up, when the staff turned their backs, when my body grew weaker, I realized I had no one. So I worked, because my child deserves better than your silence." Her words sliced through the last of his defenses. He felt small, exposed, as guilt weighed him down. In that crowded bar, beneath judgmental eyes, the truth of his neglect stood bare, undeniable and devastating. The story of their broken bond was not written by accident alone, it had been poisoned drop by the presence of another woman. The mistress had entered his life with charm and cunning, cloaking herself in admiration and false sweetness. She flattered his ego, whispered in his ear that his wife was ungrateful, weak, unfit for the life he provided. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she became a shadow between husband and wife, turning his gaze away from the woman who loved him and toward the illusion of passion and excitement she offered. Each time his wife reached out with quiet pleas for attention, the mistress found ways to twist those moments, painting her as needy, fragile, or dramatic. "She should be happy with what you give her," the mistress would say with a smirk, her voice dripping with poison. And he believed her, or perhaps he wanted to. It was easier to listen to the woman who told him what he wanted to hear than to face the truth of his wife's loneliness. As his heart drifted toward the mistress's shallow affections, his wife's world grew colder. She suffered in silence, refusing to stoop to the mistress's level of games and lies. Behind closed doors, the mistress thrived, dining at his table, laughing at his jokes, enjoying the luxuries that rightfully belonged to his family. Meanwhile, his wife's body carried the weight of his child, and her soul carried the weight of his betrayal. Each cruel smile from the mistress was another knife twisted deeper, but she bore it quietly, never letting bitterness consume her. She endured, waiting for the day the truth would surface. And now, standing in that bar, the consequences of his blindness were finally unraveling before his eyes. The tension that had been simmering between them could no longer stay contained. Voices rose above the hum of the bar, drawing the attention of every customer and staff member nearby. The millionaire, usually so composed and untouchable, now stood with his emotions spilling over in front of strangers. His voice cracked with desperation as he pleaded, his anger dissolving into visible guilt. The man who once commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will now appeared powerless, stripped bare by the truth of his failures. His polished image shattered with every word that stumbled out of his mouth. Patrons turned in their seats, some whispering, others staring openly, shocked to see a man of his stature unravel so completely. Staff members froze, unsure whether to intervene or let the storm rage on. But in the center of the chaos, it was the wife who held herself steady. Her hands rested firmly over her pregnant belly, her face pale but calm, her voice measured. She did not shout, nor did she return his outbursts with bitterness. Instead, she stood like a pillar of quiet dignity, her strength shining brighter than the humiliation of being exposed in such a setting. Her calm composure contrasted sharply with his frantic energy, making the imbalance painfully clear. She was the one wronged, yet she carried herself with grace. He, once the powerful millionaire, now trembled under the weight of his guilt. The entire bar bore witness to a truth he could no longer hide. Money and influence meant nothing in the face of betrayal and neglect. The scene etched itself into every observer's memory, a woman's dignity standing tall against her husband's downfall, a turning point neither of them could ever erase. Alone later that night, after the bar had emptied and the murmurs of onlookers faded, the millionaire sat in the quiet of his private car, the city lights blurring past his window. The scene he had just witnessed replayed endlessly in his mind. Her calm strength, her unwavering dignity, the way she had carried herself despite humiliation. For the first time, he allowed himself to truly feel the weight of his mistakes. Each neglected call, each absent night, each dismissive word he had spoken to her now pierced him with sharp clarity. He had believed wealth and attention could substitute for love, but the stark reality of her suffering proved how profoundly wrong he had been. Memories of her loyalty flooded his thoughts, nights she had waited for him to return home, the sacrifices she made quietly, never complaining, always supporting him even when he had been absent or careless. He remembered the little gestures he had once taken for granted, the gentle way she smoothed his tie, the way she prepared meals when he was too consumed with work to notice, the quiet encouragement she had given during his hardest decisions. And now, he saw how she had endured so much without bitterness, how she had protected her dignity and their child while he remained blind. Guilt weighed heavily on him, but it sparked something deeper, a burning determination to make things right. He could no longer rely on words alone, he needed to act, to show through effort and devotion that he understood the depth of his failures. For the first time, the millionaire realized that love required presence, sacrifice, and unwavering attention, and he vowed that he would fight to restore what he had almost destroyed. The awakening was painful, humbling, but it ignited a resolve he had never known he possessed. She met his pleading gaze with a calm that belied the storm within her. The tears in his eyes, the trembling of his voice, and the desperation in his posture could not erase the months of neglect, the countless nights she had spent alone, or the sacrifices she had made to protect their unborn child. She had endured humiliation and hardship quietly, but she was not willing to hand herself over to that vulnerability again without certainty that he would truly change. Her mind was made up. She would not return easily. Her priorities were clear, the safety of her child and the preservation of her own dignity. No amount of wealth or eloquent apology could replace the emotional support and respect she had been denied. She would watch him, observe his actions, and only allow trust to rebuild slowly, brick by brick. As she turned away slightly, letting him see her resolve, she left him with the uncertainty he had never known before. He could no longer assume her forgiveness, or her presence would be unconditional. The balance of power had shifted. It was now he who had to prove himself worthy, who had to fight to regain what he had taken for granted. And in that silence, she held the quiet strength that had carried her through every hardship. In the days that followed, the millionaire understood that words alone could never repair the damage he had done. He began showing up, not with gifts or grand declarations, but with consistent presence and unwavering effort. He attended every doctor's appointment, ensuring his wife and child were cared for. He took on household responsibilities he had long ignored and actively sought to understand her needs and fears. Each small act was deliberate, a demonstration that he recognized the depth of his failings and was willing to rebuild trust through tangible effort rather than hollow promises. The transformation was neither immediate nor easy. He stumbled, faltered, and faced resistance at every step, yet he persisted, driven by genuine remorse and love. Meanwhile, the wife's quiet strength did not go unnoticed. Friends, family, and even strangers who learned of her ordeal marveled at her resilience. Her story became an inspiration, a testament to endurance, dignity, and the courage to protect oneself and one's child even in the face of betrayal. She carried herself with grace, proving that hardship did not define her, and that her choices were rooted in wisdom and self-respect rather than bitterness. Ultimately, the saga left a powerful lesson etched into both their hearts. Love requires care, attention, and respect. Betrayal carries consequences that cannot be erased, and forgiveness must be earned through sincere action, not merely offered freely. Redemption was possible, but only for those willing to confront their failures and transform themselves. In the quiet aftermath, as the city whispered of their story, one truth remained clear: strength, loyalty, and dignity endure far longer than wealth, deception, or fleeting passion.